Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on using group policy for software deployment. In this lesson, we'll take a look at how software deployment through group policy can help out our Global Mantix Corporation. I'll go over the different software installation options that are available to you. I'll explain exactly what you need in order to install software using a GPO. And then we'll also talk about using group policy to maintain software. Now, Global Mantix uses a wide range of applications to meet its business goals. They need a way to easily deploy these applications to workstations throughout their network without having to visit each one individually. Okay, so the first thing is by using group policy to deploy these applications, they won't have to go out and visit each of the individual computers. They would also like for these applications to be resilient and self-repairing in the event of corruption. You will see that when deploying with group policy, we have to use what's called Windows Installer package files. And one of the benefits of using those Windows Installer package files is that you have resilient, self-repairing applications. There also needs to be some control over which users and or computers get which applications so we can avoid the needless clutter and overhead that comes from installing everything on every computer. So as we've already seen with everything else in group policy, we go ahead and link the group policy that's going to deploy the software to a container that has the users and or computers that need those applications. Now, before we get into the actual operating system and look at how to do this, let me talk to you a little bit about the different installation options that are available. Now, you can either deploy software to users or computers, right? We've seen that with group policy, is that we have both the user side and the computer side of the configuration within group policy. On the user side, we have two choices. We can do what's called assign or publish the software to our users. On the computer side of things, we only have one option, and that's to assign the software to the computers. Now, when we assign software to users, the users will immediately, as soon as the group policy has taken effect, they will immediately see a start menu shortcut and sometimes even a desktop shortcut, depending on the application package. Now, how does the software actually get installed? See, because here's the thing. The shortcut is all that gets added when you first have the group policy applied. The actual installation takes place when you either have what's called a document invocation. And what that means is, for instance, let's say we've deployed Acrobat Reader. Well, what will happen is the PDF extension will be associated with that software, and the first time a user accesses a PDF document or attempts to access a PDF document, Acrobat Reader will be installed. Now, the other way that the software will be installed, and I have here installed on first access. I've already mentioned first access when accessing a document with an associated extension, but if they go to access the start menu shortcut or the desktop shortcut, so they go to actually access the program, it will then be installed. Now, that is typically and by default what happens when you assign software to users. We now also have an additional option, which is to install the software at logon. Okay, so instead of just installing the start menu and or desktop shortcuts, you can tell it to do a full-blown installation when the user logs in, which of course is the same time that they're going to be accessing the group policy and having this all take effect. Okay, so those are some of the different options when it comes to assigning software to users. Now, another option with users is to publish the software to users. This means that you make the software available through the control panel. I will show you when we go into the operating system that the user can go into the Programs Control Panel and choose to add new programs, and you will see that there is then a list of software that's been made available through the group policy object, and they can then install the software that way. The other thing, and I don't have it listed here, is I will tell you that when software is published to users, you also can have document invocation. If it's been published, you again can have the software installed based upon a file extension that's been associated with that software being accessed. But otherwise, when you're publishing it to the users, it is installed only upon request, meaning the user goes out to Control Panel and requests it and says, I want this software. Now, the last option that is available is on the computer side, and that's called assigning the software to the computers. And in this instance, there's really nothing fancy or special in the way of different choices or options. If you assign software to computers, it will be installed the next time the computer starts up. Okay, so that's how the different software installation options work. Now, what do you need to install software with the GPO? Well, you need a Windows installer package, which I had mentioned earlier, and these are .msi files. And what's really cool about these Windows installer package files is that, like I'd mentioned earlier with the Global Mantix scenario, they are resilient, self-repairing applications. If a file, because you know that applications, it's been a lot of years since they've just been a single file. There's a lot of files that make up an application. And if one of those files were to somehow get accidentally deleted or renamed or just corrupt, what happens is when you have an application that's installed with a Windows installer package file, is every time that application is launched, it checks itself. It does a little integrity check to say, are all of my files available and intact? And if they're not, well, then it regenerates the missing or corrupt file. Now, there's a couple of additional files that go along with your Windows installer package files, and they are what's known as MST files, which are transform files, and these are what are used in order to customize an installation. Now, I will tell you that MST files cannot be used on their own. An MST file will only work if there is a corresponding MSI file to the application to get the software installed in the first place. Okay, these transform files are just for modifications. The other type of file that goes along with the Windows installer package files are the MSP or patch files. And these are used to update an existing MSI file for things like security updates, bug fixes, service packs, things like that. Okay, so MSP files are just what they sound like. They're patch files. They patch an existing Windows installer package file that you have in place. Now, similar to the transform file, again, a patch file cannot work on its own. It needs to have a corresponding or base Windows installer package file to work with first. Now, there is another option instead of a Windows installer package file, and that would be something called a down-level application package or a ZAP file. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. Yes, you can use these files, but there are a couple of significant limitations. One is that they work with publishing to users only. Okay, so whereas we talked about here, we can assign to users, we can publish to users, and we can assign to computers. Nope, not with the down-level application package file. Okay, those ZAP files can only be published to users. Now you might be thinking, okay, not so bad, so I'll just publish. And through document invocation and or users going to Control Panel, we'll get our software installed. Well, the other problem is that the users must have administrative privileges on the local computer And these days we're trying to get away from that. That generally causes a real problem with using these ZAP files. Okay, so here's what I'm going to tell you about ZAP files. They're gone. Don't use them. Okay, do not recommend it at all. I just put it up there originally so that you could know that it is an option that's available to you, but I can tell you that almost nobody does it. So let's go back to talking about our Windows installer package files. Okay, those are what we need. Well, what we also need is a shared folder with a minimum of read access to users who need to install the software. Now, what are we going to put in that shared folder? Yep, you guessed it, the Windows installer package file. Okay, that's where we're going to put it. We have to have it out on our network where it's accessible to the users. And the last thing we need, well, we need the GPO itself. We need a GPO linked to the container with the users and or computers that you want to install the software. All right, why don't we pop over to the actual operating system so we can go in and see exactly how this all works. Okay, so here we are on our Windows 7 client in the Global Mantix network. And before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick things as far as some setup that I've done to get this demonstration ready. The first thing is, if you've been following along with the previous few lessons, then you should also be in place to easily manage group policy. Okay, if you want to manage group policy, you have to have the group policy management utility. You can either go to a domain controller, New York DC1 or New York DC2, and find it there, or you can install the remote server administration tools on the Windows 7 client, which we've done here, where you can just click Start, go to Administrative Tools, and select Group Policy Management. If you need help with how to do that, feel free to go back to the first lesson on group policy where we installed that tool. The next thing that I've done, I have set up a couple of shared folders out on New York Member 1, which is our file server in the Global Mantix domain. Let me go ahead and connect to that server now. Okay, here on New York Member 1, I want to show you that I have a folder here called Reader. And what it has in there is it has the software for Acrobat Reader. Now, this is the actual MSI file. The extensions are hidden right now. Matter of fact, let's change that. Let me hit Alt and go to Tools, Folder Options, View, and let's go ahead and not hide extensions for known file types. Click OK. There you go. Now you can see it's acroread.msi. If I were to expand this out over here, you'd see it's a Windows installer package file. I have a Firefox folder, which you'll never guess what's in there. Yep, MSI package file for Firefox. Let's close that. Office 2007, which has the entire installation source for Microsoft Office 2007. And then we have Office 2010, which gives us the entire installation source for Office 2010. Now, you may or may not have access to this software. If you don't, well then don't worry about it. You can use pretty much any Windows installer package file to follow along with what I'm doing here. And if you can't get your hands on any Windows installer package files, well, don't worry about that. Just follow along. Just watch what I'm doing, and you'll see that it's not that difficult. And the other thing that I'll mention to you real quick here is I should tell you that this is something that is definitely important to know for the Microsoft certification exam if that's what you are looking to accomplish. And it's good to know how this works for real-world knowledge, but it is not that heavily used in the real world. This is something that Microsoft put out there originally with Windows 2000, and it was thought to be the new way that all software was going to be distributed. But there's a couple of drawbacks, and even Microsoft has acknowledged these drawbacks, and for the most part, they continue to keep this option available in group policy to support those who are choosing to do this. But the problem is that when you deploy software using group policy, there is no response from the client. Okay, there's no response from the client to say, "Thank you, I got the software," or "No, something went wrong." There's no way to keep tabs on where and when software has been installed. And so, along with just that general lack of centralized management, well, there's also no license management. There's no way of really truly controlling how many copies of the software have been put out there, other than to use group policy to deploy to a container that only has the right number of computers to match your licensing. But I'm sure you can probably imagine how that could easily change and could take you out of your license agreement and put you in violation. Okay, and so it's for that reason that this is used, but not very heavily. So follow along. I want you to understand how this works, but don't expect to use it a whole lot out in the real world. Now, one more thing I want to show you before we leave New York Member 1, and that is if I go to the properties of this reader folder and go to the sharing tab and go to advanced sharing, you will see that this folder has been shared under the name reader. If I go to permissions, you'll see that everyone has read. Now cancel out of there, cancel out of there. If I go to the security tab, again, you will see that everyone has read access. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window. And if I were to go ahead and go into the properties of each of the other folders here, you'll see again it's shared. Everyone has read permissions. Go to security. Everyone has read permissions. And just continue on down through each of these folders. We're just verifying that the folders have been set up to be shared with everyone and that everyone can read the contents inside. Okay, looks like so far so good. 3 down, 1 to go. Go to the properties, the last one. It's been shared. Everyone read. Security, everyone read. Okay, so I have set up these 4 folders properly in the sense that they've been shared, everyone has access, and the data that we're going to need is inside. Now, one other quick comment before we leave New York Member 1, and that is, you'll notice I gave everyone read access. I didn't give full control access. You don't want people in here making changes to the contents that are in these folders. When you have a folder that is shared for the purposes of deploying an application, it's very important that you strictly minimize who has access to make changes to that folder. Because one small change can suddenly make it that none of your users are getting their software. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out of New York Member 1. Okay, I was just brought us there to show you that those shares exist. What we want to do now is go ahead and come over here and click Start, Administrative Tools, Group Policy Management. Here in Group Policy Management, let's take a look at how we can deploy software to the Global Mantics network. So here we have our default domain policy. Now we could go ahead and we could create a new group policy specifically for the purposes of deploying software, and we could link that policy to certain locations, or as we've seen, if we break down our locations, we can even deploy software out to certain departments. Okay, we have the ability to have control over where we're deploying it. But for right now, let's just go ahead and let's edit the default domain policy, because we want to go ahead and deploy software to the entire company right now. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and select Edit. Takes us into our Group Policy Management Editor. Let me go ahead and maximize that. Now under Computer Configuration Policies, if I expand that, you'll see here is Software Settings. And if I expand User Configuration Policies, again, here are Software Settings. Well, let's start down here under the user configuration. Okay, let's start off by deploying software to our users. If I expand software settings, you'll see here is software installation. If I click on software installation, well, you'll see there's no items currently there, right? We haven't done anything yet. What we need to do is right-click on software installation and select New Package. And then we go ahead and browse to the location where we have our Windows installer package. So what I'm going to put in is // New York mem1 2k8, right? That's the server where we have those package files. If I put a /, well, you'll see it actually brings me right down to all the different shared folders. So I can select Firefox. Okay, we're going to start off with that one. I'll click Open. And here is our Firefox. And if I move this bar over, you'll see this is the Windows installer package file. So let's go ahead and double click on that. Here I get to choose whether I want to publish the software, assign the software, or I could click on Advanced. Now I will tell you that when you click on Advanced, all this really does is it forces you to go through the property sheets of this deployment. Okay, so I'll show you that later, but for right now I'm going to just click Assigned. Let's go ahead and assign Firefox. So I'll click OK. And it takes just a moment here while it analyzes that it's a legitimate Windows installer package file, and then it will pop up on the screen. And there we go. It shows us that we have Mozilla Firefox English US edition. And it also says where the actual original source is for the actual file itself. Now if I were to right click on this and go to Properties, you will see that I have different options available here. If I go to Deployment, this is where I can choose between Published and Assigned. When it's assigned, you will see here that it auto-installs this application by file extension activation. And it's grayed out. That box is checked and I can't uncheck it. That means that if somebody were to click on a document that has the right extension that associates with Firefox, it will automatically install. Now I could choose to uninstall this application when it falls out of the scope of management. And what that means is if, let's say I deployed this to a specific OU, and there's a user in that OU, and that user gets Firefox. If that user was to be moved to a different organizational unit and was no longer affected by this group policy, then this is where we choose, well, do you leave Firefox installed? Or if I check this box, it will uninstall because the user is no longer in the organizational unit where this software is supposed to be installed. We could choose whether we want to display this package in Add Remove Programs in Control Panel. Okay, so I'd mentioned that when you publish software to your users, they access it via Control Panel. Well, when you assign to users, it again can be installed via Control Panel, unless you say that you don't want it displayed in the Control Panel. Now here is the other option that I mentioned, which is where you can tell it to flat out install the application at logon. Okay, where you don't just get the Start menu shortcut, you full-blown install the application. Now here we have some additional installation user interface options, basic or maximum, which just has to do with what level of interface do you want the users to have when they go through the installation. Now I'm not going to get into great detail on this. It's kind of outside the scope of where I want to take us right now, but I can also tell you that you can create what's called administrative installation packages, where you can make it that the user doesn't have to make any selections, they don't have to go through any wizard of any kind, it just installs in the background. It just basically says, please wait while it's installing. For right now, we're going to leave it where the user will still see the full installation. Now, the Upgrade tab we'll look at in a little bit, the Categories tab we'll look at in a little bit. Modifications, this is where you can go ahead and add your MST or MSP files, Again, we're not going to actually get into that level of detail in this lesson, but this is where you would do that. And then, of course, we have the security tab where we can take a look at permissions. Now, let me go ahead and cancel out of here. I'm just going to leave all the default settings, right? We've assigned Firefox, and we've assigned it to pretty much all users in the domain, right? Because if I close this, we did that to the default domain policy. So let's close this. Now, one thing I can tell you is we learned about GP update in a previous lesson, and GP update will force client to go out there and get the new group policy object settings. Well, I can tell you when it comes to software, GP update typically does not work. We actually have to log off and log back on again. So let's go ahead and do that now. Click Start and log off. And then we'll go ahead and press Control-Alt-Delete and log back in again. Now we could log in as anybody. Okay, we could log in as the administrator who we've been using for most of this course, or we could log in as one of the users because we said deployed to all users in the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and log it back in just as administrator. That's a user in the domain. And it may take, and if you're following along, I can tell you that any of these steps may take a little bit longer than what you're typically used to. And the reason why is because the system is going out there and trying to find software and install software and do things in the background. So let's take a look and see if this worked. I'm going to go ahead and click on Start and look at that. I have it right here, but if I click All Programs, you'll see that Mozilla Firefox is there. And if I select it, you see what it's doing? It's going through and it now takes us into the installation wizard. It's not actually installed yet. The user thinks it's installed when they look at the Start menu, but they quickly find out that it's not installed when they click on it the first time. They have to go through the wizard. So I'll go ahead and click on Next. Sure, I accept. Next. And we'll just do a basic installation and install. And it'll go through here and install Firefox. Now, while this is installing, I'm going to tell you a couple of other things. This in itself is another reason why group policy is not heavily used when it comes to software installation, is because you know what happens when you have a situation like we have right here? Yeah, you get a lot of phone calls to help desk. Okay? What happens is users, they just come in and they go, oh, cool, I got Firefox. And then they click on it and they go, huh? And rather than going through and installing it like I just did, they get confused and say, I don't know what to do. They call into help desk and say, I don't know, I have Firefox, but then I clicked on it, it says it wants to install. Okay, now users will quickly get used to this. Okay, once they've seen this the first time, watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. Right, the software is installed. I'm going to say don't import anything. That was just asking me if I wanted to import stuff that I previously had in Internet Explorer. And I am going to go ahead and say no, I don't want this to be my default browser and don't perform this check anymore. And I'll click on no. And I'm actually going to go ahead and quickly close out of here. You'll notice I'm not even getting internet access anyway. So I'll just go ahead and quit. Now I'm the user. I click on Start, All Programs, Mozilla Firefox, click on it. Look what happens. Boom, we go right in. And how about that? We were on the internet. It was whatever page it was trying to open. Apparently it wasn't able to get there. So that's why I say, yeah, it does generate some calls to help desk when the user sees that installation box the very first time, if they're not used to this whole process. But they only get that the very first time that they go to install. Now, if I were to go ahead and close this, and even if I were to log off and log back on again, when I open up Firefox, from now on, it's just installed. Now, the next thing I want to show you is if I come down here and click Start, Computer, go to my C drive, and I'm going to go into Program Files x86 because that's where I'll find the application files for Mozilla Firefox. And in here, I'm going to do a couple things. one thing I'm going to do is see this accessible marshal.dll. Well, I don't know exactly what that file is, but it probably is something that is significant to Firefox because it's a DLL, okay? It's an application extension. And I'm going to go ahead and delete it. So, yep, I'm sure I want to delete it. Uh-oh. Let's take it a step further. Let's go to this mozcpp19.dll. Oop. And let's rename this .old. Okay, so what I've done is I have renamed a file or corrupted it, and I've deleted one. Let's go ahead and close out of here. Now, when you click Start, All Programs, Firefox, watch what happens. Oh, now it says it needs to resume the installation wizard. Now, this won't always happen. Depending on exactly what got corrupted, in some cases it'll just kind of go zap. You will see something in the background here that'll be a little confusing, but it'll just auto reinstall itself. And sometimes if it's a significant enough file, it says, oh, we got to actually go through the little wizard here. So I'll click Install, and it's going to go through, and it's basically just going to recopy everything again. Click Finish, and it takes us right back into Firefox. Now, besides being back in Firefox, let me go ahead and close this. Let me go ahead and open it one more time just so you can see it's not going to happen every time. All right, just happened once. If I go back into Computer, C Drive, Program Files, Firefox. Here we go, Accessible Marshal. It's back. And then down here, that mozcpp19.old, right? We renamed it. Well, that file's still there. It's not going to delete it. It doesn't know what that file is. It's just going to leave it there. But look, it reinstalled the original DLL file. Now let's go ahead and delete this old file. We don't need that. That was just for demonstration purposes. I just wanted to show you that that is what Windows Installer package files give you. They give you resilient, self-repairing applications. Every time you launch Firefox from here on forward, it's going to check to see if all the files are there, if they're intact, and if they're not, it's going to reinstall. Now again, is this going to generate calls into Help Desk? Yes. When a user goes to open up Firefox and they see this resume installation, some will just click Install, but some are going to call and say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But guess what? If Firefox got corrupt and just wasn't working, they're going to be calling in anyway. So these I would not say are needless calls because they would come in anyway. They just end up seeming like nuisance calls because, well, it's one of those tedious phone calls you get and you kind of roll your eyes and say, okay, just go ahead and click Install and everything will be fine. And you don't even want to have to explain it. All right, what do we want to do next? Well, let's go back into Group Policy Management. Let's go back into our default domain policy. Let's go ahead and edit that, maximize that. And let's expand our user policies, expand software settings. Going to right click, new, package. Now we don't want Firefox again, so I'm going to back up here to just the New York member server, and then I'm going to go down here to Reader, and this time we're going to select AcroRead. Now this time we want to publish the software instead of assign it. But instead of publishing it, I'm going to click Advanced, just so you can see once how this works. If I click OK, it takes just a moment while it analyzes that it's a legitimate package file. And then it takes you straight into the property sheet. Okay, so that's the only real difference, meaning now I manually have to select deployment. I have to decide that I want published. I have to then decide my other options. And that would include upgrades, categories, and modifications and security. Okay, and you'll notice, by the way, that when you're publishing the software, auto-installing with file extension activation is optional. I could choose not to do that. I could make it that if this software is published, you can only access it via the control panel. But I typically do like to have file extension activation in place. Makes it nice and easy. Again, I could choose to uninstall this application if it falls out of the scope of management. I could choose to not display this in control panel. I could make it that it only deploys via file extension activation. And you'll notice this is not an option to install at logon. That's only when assigning. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I now have a published piece of software. Again, we did it for all users in the domain, right? If I close out of here, we did this on the default domain policy. So let's close this. Let's log off once again. And then go ahead and log back in. And again, this might take just a moment longer. Actually, it went pretty quickly this time. But what we should now have is, first of all, if I click on the Start menu, you'll notice there's nothing here about Acrobat Reader. Okay, nothing there. No shortcut on the desktop, no Start menu, nothing. But if I click on Start and go to Control Panel, and then in the Control Panel, I click on Programs, and then I click on Programs and Features. Now, I could jump right into the links, but I want to show you the full detailed way to get there. Click on Programs and Features. And by default, you'll see it takes us to uninstall or change a program. So here it shows that we have Firefox already installed. So this is where I could uninstall it. Here's the VMware Tools, and that's because I'm using VMware Workstation to demonstrate all this. But here is install a program from the network. And you'll see, well, here's Firefox, right? Because that's one that is available, although it's already installed. And then here is Adobe Reader. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and then click on Install. And it's going to take us through this installation utility. Click on Next and Install. Now, there's nothing I'm really showing you here that you haven't seen before. I'm just installing a program. Okay, it's just that it's being done via the control panel. That's where the user was able to find that this program was even available. Now, as you can see here, this is going to take just a little bit longer. I think we have about 20 seconds. Oh, look at it's going up. We were at 18, then we went 19, 20, 21, 22. Look at it, we're up to 24. This is an interesting installation utility, huh? It takes longer and longer, well, the longer you wait. The number's just growing and growing. Well, trust me, it will eventually end. And when it does, Adobe Acrobat Reader, well, I guess technically they've taken out the word Acrobat. That's, I guess, a little old school. I'm going by the old name. Adobe Reader will be installed. Now, remember, the other way that we could have had Adobe Reader installed is if we would have had a PDF document. If we would have just tried to open that PDF document, it would have went through this process. Now, again, that might generate phone calls into help desk, right? A user goes ahead and they click on their PDF document and it's like, whoa, why is it suddenly trying to install Reader? Well, that is a reason why you may or may not want to use group policy in this manner. What I can tell you, and you'll see this is just about done here, and it is complete. So I'll go ahead and click on Finish. And I'll close out a control panel. What I can tell you is if you are going to use group policy to deploy software, what I recommend is that you do one of two things. Let me go back here into group policy management. And let's edit the policy here. I recommend that you either assign your software, and not only assign it, but go ahead and under deployment say install this application at logon. Okay, that'll just go ahead and force the application out when the users log on for the next time. Yes, it might be a little confusing when they log on, but at least then you can solve it by like sending out an email, let's say to the users or to the company or whoever you're deploying it to and saying, here you go, we are deploying the software. When you log on the next time, you're going to be prompted to install the software. Okay, the other option is to go here under Computer Configuration, Software Settings, and install a new package here. And as long as we're in here doing this, let's go back to our server and let's go to Office 2007. Now, this is Enterprise Edition, where you need to go into the enterprise.ww folder. And here you find the Enterprise WW Windows Installer package file. And you'll notice that published is not an option. Okay, so I recommend that you assign it to the computer, and then again, it installs the next time the computer is rebooted. That's how I recommend that you do it if you are going to use group policy, because using group policy to publish software to users, well, it's not very practical. Not very many users are going to go to Control Panel looking for software. Yes, if you do that regularly in your environment, users will get used to it. But it's not a normal way to do things. Not only that, but then you run into the instance of software being deployed on an as-needed basis. And although that sounds like a good thing, well, you end up with the extra confusion on the user's part when they go to just use the software they thought they could use, and then it tries to install. Now, while I was explaining all that, you'll notice that Microsoft Office Enterprise 2007 now is set up to be assigned to, well, all computers in the domain. So if I close this and close out of here, now again, Adobe Reader has been installed. We've already seen how Firefox has also been installed. Now, in order to get Office 2007 installed, we need to reboot. And I'm going to tell you, if you are following along, typically, believe it or not, this takes 2 reboots. One way that I have found to hopefully avoid the second reboot is I'm going to go ahead and run a GP update. Now, this GP update will not install the software. I'm still going to have to reboot. But this sometimes makes it that I only have to do a single reboot. And that's because the double reboot typically is because the first one was just to get the group policy and the second one was to actually install the software. It's a little bit goofy. Now, I don't know if you saw, but when I did that GP update, it didn't just say updated successfully. It had a whole big warning message on there about client-side extensions. I'm not going to go back and show it to you because the message is not important, other than it basically was telling you, hey, you're going to have to actually reboot in order for this group policy to work. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot now. Let me go ahead and click restart. And this is going to take just a few moments for the computer to reboot. And again, it's going to take even a little bit longer than we're typically used to, because what it should try to do is install the software in the background, so that reboot takes a little longer. So I'm going to pause the recording of this lesson, and if you are following along and you're trying to do this with me, you pause as well, and then I will resume as soon as we are fully rebooted. Okay, the system has rebooted, and as I mentioned a moment ago, it did take considerably longer than it typically takes to reboot this computer. You could hear the hard drive spinning away, and that was because I believe it was doing was installing the software. So let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And let's see what has happened on this system. Now you'll notice that even the login process is taking a little bit longer. And well, again, it's because there is a whole involved process when it comes to installing a big package like Office. Matter of fact, when it comes to Office 2007, let me go ahead and click on Start here. Click All Programs. Oh, apparently it's going to take the double reboot. It has not installed yet. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot one more time. I'm going to go ahead and pause the system. I was wishing that the GP update would have worked, but it didn't. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the system, and I'll be right back with you as soon as it's done rebooting. All right, I have just completed the second reboot. It did take 2 full reboots, and the second reboot took even longer than the first reboot. Let's go ahead and log in, and let's see if the software has now been installed. Now, this will take just a moment to log in. Everything does go a little bit slower right after you deploy software because it's trying to do all kinds of stuff in the background. But hopefully, we have our software now. Let's take a look. If I click on Start and go to All Programs, aha, Microsoft Office. Now, I am going to tell you that when it comes to Office 2007, Microsoft themselves have kind of backed off the idea of deploying through group policy. So if I click here, whereas normally you would see like Microsoft Access and Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint, etc., well, now what you end up having is you have these Microsoft Office tools, and what you really need to do is you see up here where it says Open Microsoft Office Document or New Microsoft Office Document. When I click on that, that's when the software is going to be installed. Now, that's not specific to group policy. That has to do with Office being deployed through group policy. Now, I'm not going to bother doing that here because I don't need to demonstrate Microsoft Office being installed. Okay, I just wanted to show you that when you deploy something with group policy, it happens with the reboot of a system. Okay, so that is how you would deploy software by either assigning to users, publishing to users, or assigning to computers. Now let's go talk about maintaining software using group policy. Now when it comes to maintaining software using group policy, the first thing that I really need to emphasize is that the only software that can be maintained using group policy is software that was originally deployed using group policy. Okay, and that is one huge thing to keep in mind, because I can tell you that when I first started teaching this stuff in Windows 2000, matter of fact, I'll even go back and say when I first learned this stuff in Windows 2000, I was thinking, cool. If I jump right down here to the bottom where one of the things you can do is remove applications. Hey, I know there's software out on my network that I don't like. I can use group policy to remove it. No, you actually can't. You can only do this software maintenance on software that you originally deployed with group policy. If a user has installed something on their own, you can't do anything with it via group policy. So, what are some of our options that are available to us? Well, one option is to redeploy the application. You can force an application to redeploy itself after a change has been made to the package. Okay, so let's say you have a package that you already deployed, and some users already have received that software. But then you realize that you had an older version or something, and you got a newer version of the package, and you want that version to be put out there. Now, I don't want you to confuse this with upgrading. This is just maybe a newer patched type package. And yes, I know we can do MSP files, but the idea is there's something new about the deployment package. Here's the deal. Once a user or computer has installed the software via group policy, it will never try to install it again. Unless, of course, the program becomes corrupt or files are missing, and then, of course, it goes through and reinstalls itself. But it doesn't ever install via group policy when the user logs in or the computer is rebooted, unless you choose to redeploy. Then you're forcing the user or computer to go ahead and reinstall the software. Another option that is available to you when it comes to maintaining software is upgrade the application. So let's say you truly do have a new version of the software. So not a new version necessarily of the package file, but a new version of the software. You can upgrade the application with group policy. Now when you do this, you can choose to uninstall the old version first, or do an in-place upgrade over the old version. And the last option, I had already mentioned it, is the removal of applications. Now when it comes to removing applications, you can have what's called forced removal, which means you can say, all right, well, if this software was deployed, take it away. I want it uninstalled. Or you can do what's called an optional removal. And this is where you remove the installer package so you no longer are deploying any new copies of the software, but you can make it optional that the user can hang on to the software if they already had it installed and keep using it. Now let's go ahead and pop back over to the operating system and take a look at group policy management and see how these three options would be configured. Alright, so back here on our Windows 7 client, let's go ahead and go back into group policy management, and then let's go in and edit our default domain policy. And under user configuration, if I expand policies, expand software settings, click on software installation, here you'll see we have Reader and Firefox. If I right click on one of these packages, so here we have Firefox as a for instance, and I go to all tasks, this is where I will see there is an option for redeploy application. If I select that, then even users who already have Firefox previously deployed, it will attempt to install Firefox again. Now there's no real purpose in us doing this right now, nor would we see any change because it's the same package. But I just want to show you that that's where the setting is. What I can also show you is that right here we have another setting that says remove. Okay, so this is if we want to remove Firefox. Not only are we removing it from the group policy, but let me go ahead and click on it. You will see here that we have the choice of immediately uninstalling the software from users and computers. That would be the forced removal. Or allow users to continue using the software, just don't install any new installations. So let's go ahead and say that we're going to immediately uninstall. Click OK. Okay, Firefox is gone. Let's close the window. Let's close out of group policy management. First of all, I just want you to see that Firefox is still there. Let's go ahead and log off. And then we'll log back in again. And that will force this group policy to go ahead and take effect. And if everything has worked correctly, and you'll notice that, again, this might take a little bit longer, and part of the reason why is because it's uninstalling the software. So if everything worked correctly, all programs, look at that. Firefox is gone. Now, if I were to go into our group policy management utility, edit the default domain policy, go down here and remove, or all tasks, remove, and then say allow users to continue using the software. Okay, I'm not going to deploy Adobe Reader to anybody else. But even if I log off and then log back in again, first of all, you'll notice it came up pretty quickly. You'll also notice that Acrobat Reader is still here. And it's still here. And it's still here. Okay? It's still installed. Even though we're not going to deploy it to anybody else, it's still installed. Okay? So that's how you can redeploy or remove an application. But what about upgrading? Let's go back into our group policy management utility and edit the default domain policy. Let's expand our computer configuration policies, software settings, click on software installation. And here you'll see that we have Office Enterprise 2007. Well, in order to upgrade, what we need to do is right-click, New, Package, and first set up the upgraded package. So let's back out of here and go back to New York Mem 1. And let's go into Office 2010. Now, Office 2010 is called Office 2010 Professional Plus. So here we have the Pro Plus R WW folder. Again, this is just specific, this is not some kind of thing that you would do with any package. It's if you were to go out there and research how to deploy Office through group policy, you would find that this is the folder where you find the appropriate MSI file to do that installation. So here we have Pro plus RWW. Again, it's the Windows installer file, so let's go ahead and double click on it. You'll see assigned again is our only choice, so I'll click OK. And now, well, there's a couple things that are going to happen. Well, there's one thing that's going to happen, and then there's a couple options that we have, but it's going to assume one of them. Because Office is smart enough to know, I believe it's going to automatically choose to do it as an upgrade. Yeah, I can see from this little arrow right here, this little green up arrow, that it automatically assumed that this is an upgrade to this. So if I were to right click on my new package here and go to Properties, and then go to the Upgrades tab, you will see here it says Packages that this package will upgrade, and it says Upgrade Microsoft Office Enterprise 2007. Okay, it did that for me. And yes, that will happen if you have a program that already understands how group policy works. But let's go ahead and let's say no, that's not what we meant to do. It's actually, I'll click OK to get all the way out of here, make sure it takes the settings. Okay, now you'll notice that you just have these two packages here. What you would do if it did not automatically assume the upgrade, you would right click, go to Properties. You would go to the Upgrades tab, and then when it says Packages that this package will upgrade, you'll click Add. And then here you pick the package to upgrade, and you can pick from a certain GPO, although in this case it's in the existing GPO, and it'll look for other software packages that are currently being deployed. So we're saying, aha, okay, well, there's another one called Office Enterprise 2007, and I'm going to say, yeah, that's the one I want to upgrade. Now, you want to see what the difference is between what I'm going to do and what it did by default? I know from experience that when it comes to Microsoft Office 2007 being upgraded to 2010, it's a really good idea to uninstall Office 2007 and then install 2010 clean and not do it as an upgrade. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this selection, uninstall the existing package, then install the upgrade. The way they had it that package can be upgraded straight over the existing package. Just do it as a straight upgrade. No, I'm going to say uninstall the existing package and then install the new one. Click OK. You'll notice instead of upgrade here, it says replace. Now, this field down here, packages in the current GPO that will upgrade this package, let me go ahead and click OK to get out of this window, because I want to show you that what that is for is if I go to the old one, 2007, go to its properties, and then go to the Upgrades tab. This is where so this is the window where we say this is what we're going to upgrade, and this is where it says, hey, this guy is going to upgrade me. Okay? So that's how you would upgrade software. So what would happen is for users that already have Office Enterprise 2007 installed on their system, they would then get upgraded to Office Professional Plus 2010. And this would happen by the full removal of the old one and then the installation of the new one. Now, I'm not actually going to show you the upgrade happening. It would involve a couple, 2, maybe even 3 more lengthy reboots. Matter of fact, speaking of reboots and log off and logging in and stuff like that, I just want to show you something. If I come down here and click on Start, remember how I said that Office wasn't completely installed? You have to click the icon to say, hey, I want to go ahead and install Office the rest of the way. Well, that only happens unless you reboot again, at which point now you'll notice, hey, look, now there's no trickery here. I haven't done anything you haven't seen, but Office did finish installing the rest of the way. But anyway, I'm not gonna go ahead and have it sit here spinning its wheels doing an upgrade, but that's how you would do it. Now, real quick, the last thing I want to show you, there's one more thing that I want to show you before we wrap things up, and that is under the Categories tab. You remember the control panel applet, and by the way, you'll notice that here they talk about add remove programs because they're going back to the days of Windows XP, which obviously that's changed a little bit with Vista and Windows 7. But with the programs control panel applet, if you want to have your users going there to deploy software, then what you can do is you can go ahead and set up categories so that when they go ahead and go into control panel, go into programs, and say they want to install a program. Now I don't have any here. They would go ahead and be able to see different categories available to them so that they could, instead of seeing just every program that's available, they would be able to categorize them. Again, not something that's regularly practiced. Just wanted to show you that the option is there. All right, well, that is pretty much it when it comes to deploying software using group policy. Now, I don't know if you were able to follow along with everything that I did because you may or may not have software available to you. But as you can see, the steps are pretty self-explanatory. And if you were following along, some of the things that I didn't go all the way through because it's just time consuming, well, I would encourage you to do it. Also, if you did not have software available to you, well, when you have some, when you get some available, come back, review this lesson, and try it out and see how it all works. This may not be that heavily used in production environment, but you should know how it works. All right, so in this lesson, we took a look, first of all, at how Global Mantix could go ahead and take advantage of software deployment through group policy. We went over the software installation options, of which we saw there were three main choices. We could assign software to our users, we could publish software to our users, or we could assign software to the computers. We went over exactly what was needed to install software with a GPO, and that would be, first of all, a Windows installer package file. Now, I had mentioned that you can use a ZAP file, but it is basically never done. It's way too restrictive. So you basically need a Windows installer package file, which is an MSI file. You need to have a shared folder where everyone has read, or I really don't necessarily have to have everyone. I had that in my scenario. But everyone who's going to need the software needs to be able to read from that shared location. And then, of course, you need the GPO itself configured to deploy the software. We then saw how to use group policy to maintain the software, whether it be the redeployment of a package, the upgrading of a package, or the removal of a software package. All right, well, that's how you deploy software in group policy. I'll see you in the next lesson.